How do we engage the guardian angelhood? They don't want to engage. Let's try Meg's question again.
How to get across the concepts that we have assignments.
Oh dear. That we have assignments from spirit, the soul plan. They're talking about be who your soul wants you to be, which was the name of the first book that we wrote, and the publishers said that's too long a name, you can't have a book named that. And they said, well, that could be the subtitle, but it can't be the title. So they changed it and said the Light Workers Healing Method, be who your soul wants you to be, which we think makes it longer, not shorter. But we also, it was our first book, and we didn't want to be a know-it-all with our publisher. It's like, that's what the publisher says, in our vast experience of publishing, we should let them make this call. And so we said, okay. But that was the title, Be Who Your Soul Wants You to Be. And to do that as lives, to just live the soul plan and stop arguing, and it feels joyful and wonderful to just follow the instructions from above. And we know that that's true in all dimensions. That's one thing we would say, we know all the chips in. It's like, I don't need to save a chip on that one. All the chips in. It's true in all dimensions, is that it feels good to just do what it is that we were created to do. Just do it. And sometimes it feels really impossible, and then we'll go to the guardian angel or supervisor and say, I can't do it. And they'll say, well, what have you tried? And sometimes we realize we haven't tried the first thing.
That's right.
And then we sound ridiculous, and we can feel the stupidity.
Yeah.
And then we go try something, and sometimes it works. And we should have tried it first and not said, I can't do it, and not waste years of life saying I can't. But to just try. And then this is what Ra used to say, is that then we're starting. Just try something with an attitude of experimentation, and it might not work, but we might learn something. And then we can apply what we learned to try something different, which also might not work, but then we'll have learned something else. And then we can walk along through life, and after a while, by just pulling the nettles out of the lawn one by one, we have a nettle-free lawn, which people would have laughed and said, you can't do that, and look how big your lawn is, and you're in the country, and what are you doing pulling out your nettles by hand? But we did, and now we have a nettle-free lawn. So I think it was a good idea. And we didn't use any poison, and we dig the poison ivy out with our shovels. We don't poison it. We don't poison it back. For whom is the message? Why do you ask? How do we get across this concept that we're all accountable for something, that we're responsible? That sounds like Meg.
Yeah, it does.
Can we have Meg's question again?
Yeah. Meg asks, how to get across the concepts that we have assignments, that our actions and inactions are recorded and graded.
Okay, let's pause there. Because there does seem to be agreement that we have assignments.
I can feel the feeling.
And they do seem to know that the cameras are always running. They don't like to think it's also true for them, but they all seem to know that it is true. It's like, oh, I forgot that there's cameras everywhere. I do know that, and I can kind of tell you where they're located. And I also know that there aren't places that are not filmed because I've tried to find them, is the feeling.
Yeah, that's the feeling.
And there's always a camera pointed at me from somewhere.
Exactly.
So they do seem to know that everything is recorded. What was the next part of it?
And that there are long-term consequences.
Oh, interesting. And we have to remember how confusing it is to the dimensions that are, it's kind of like a spine, and a spine has bones And then the pads between the bones.
Yeah, I see
A
you.
bone and a pad between the bones. And dimensions work that way also. There are the dimensions that are very dense. Like this one is very dense. Well, denser, it's denser than the ones above it and below it. And the ones above it and below it are softer by comparison.
Yes.
And so they're like the pads, the discs in your back, the vertebrae and the disc. That's the metaphor that's being used. And so it's easier for the denser dimensions in that little vertebral column to remember that they're going to die one day and transition to the less dense spaces. It's easier to remember it because they're self-identified as being alive. And by definition, when we are alive, one day we will die. And just think how hard it is to get people to grasp that little fact that one day they're going to die. People go through life kind of like la 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 la. I'm going to ignore the fact that I'll die, which is the only guaranteed thing. So it's kind of strange. Think how hard it is for the guardian angels, whose job it is to inspire the denser presences, and then they forget to also look up to that which will be their own ladder of transition. So it's hard. But they do all remember. If you look at that room, they do all acknowledge, oh, that's right. That's an inconvenient reality I wanted to forget.
That's true.
It's kind of like an undocumented immigrant, you know, that's an inconvenient reality that they want to forget. They want to pretend that ICA isn't coming for them because they're a nurse and they've worked in their hospital for 20 years and they're established pillars of their community, and they don't want to think about the fact that they're still not documented. For him is the message. Why do you ask? So if we feel we should pause here, it could be that we're supposed to pause here, or it could be somebody wanting us to shut up and not ask the rest of the question.
Exactly.
Let's ask the rest of the question.
Meg asks, how to spread responsible actions, words, and attitudes. How to spread helpfulness when setting the good example doesn't work.
Somebody is just broken-hearted at that.
So sad, so sad. What keeps humanity unable to catch those good attributes?
Wow, that's fascinating. Is humanity unable to catch those good attributes? Is humanity unable to catch helpfulness? Somebody's saying selfishness would be something that would block being unable to catch helpfulness. It would be like having a genetic disorder.
Interesting.
Where we were unable to something that's desirable. It is like having a genetic disorder. Somebody else is talking, and they're talking to a third party. They're not talking to us, whoever we are. They're talking to a third party, and they're talking about this concept that's been put on the table that maybe humanity isn't smart enough, that there was an error in choosing the species, and humanity just isn't smart enough to be able to handle the job of being the dominant life form on a planet. It's possible. And maybe the genetics are flawed and they're just unable to catch the attributes of helpfulness and generosity. Generosity of spirit and of resources. That maybe humanity just is flawed, fundamentally flawed. And now the concept of original sin is put on the table, and now it's all kind of merging into many different discussions. Can we have Meg's question from the top?
Meg asks, how to get across the concepts that we have assignments, that our actions and inactions are recorded and graded.
Okay, we think that there's agreement upstairs that we have assignments,
that
we being
real.
In all dimensions, and that our actions are recorded and graded, and there's a acknowledgement, which feels a little reluctant, that yes, that is true for everybody. It's kind of like in the ABC's manual.
Yeah,
A,
I feel
B,
that.
C. It's everything is recorded, everything is graded. Go ahead.
And that there are long-term consequences.
It's the same. It's in like the children's primer.
Yeah, I feel that feeling.
That for the guardian angels, that everybody knows that. And it's kind of like how in humanity, in kindergarten, they teach kids to not lie, but the adults lie all the time, hundreds of times every day. Almost in a continuous stream without interruption. It's just lies.
I hear you.
Imprecisions, untruths, spewing untruths. And maybe that wasn't always true, but in this inconvenient era, it's pretty darn true.
That's
which is
right.
unfortunate. And people, it's not that people intend to be that way. It's like something they've caught, like a disease.
That's what they're talking about. And Meg continues, how to spread responsible actions, words, and attitudes.
That's the question, right? And this is interesting because it seemed that there was an expectation that they would catch.
I hear you.
And that there's something that seems to be like a genetic flaw that's blocking it, but the genetic flaw seems to have occurred before humanity differentiated from the other great apes. And maybe it tracks back even before that. It's like everybody has this flaw, other than through like some freak thing like albinos, where there's a freak combination that produces the albino state. And so there can be people who, through some unknown or not well understood mechanism, become unselfish and responsible. But we don't know how to duplicate it, is the feeling. It's like Weibo.
They're talking about lightning in a bottle.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If you have your little bottle of lightning, then you're all set. Now, where do you get that?
Right. And Meg's question continues, how to spread helpfulness when setting the good example doesn't work.
Right. And there are many people who are helpful to the evil empire.
Interesting,
and
right?
That's not what they're supposed to be doing. They're being helpful to the wrong ladder. They're climbing the wrong ladder.
Yeah.
And that is poison to the soul and poison to checkout day. And really better to not be helpful to the evil empire. Better to be just neutral, not harming anything. Or be helpful to be working to stop the destruction in a fair and just way, because that's the assignment for all of us here on planet Earth. And now what about the guardian angelhood? Is that not also the assignment? Well, the assignment is to get humanity to stop the destruction in a fair and just way. There's arguing that has the tone of arguing.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And then Meg's question continues, what keeps humanity unable to catch those good attributes?
This is interesting, and it could be a genetic disorder.
A flaw. Yeah, I hear you.
This kind of ties into that, what they've said for years is it's a bad batch.
That's what they're talking about.
Bad ingredients. There was a contaminant in the original stardust when Earth coagulated, when the solar system coagulated, when the universes coagulated. That there was contamination in the batch. It's a bad batch. And maybe this whole black hole of corruption started from a contaminated batch. What do we do about that? How can we inspire a divine miracle to address the problems of these cycles of corruption in this complex series of complex failures?